as you can see behind my table is my reveal wall. I sell all of my images already printed and finished. You give me one camera with a good lens and you give me one girl, then I could make $3,000 a day. I've spent my life mastering my craft and I want to honor it by making beautiful portraits that are worth being paid, and you're worth being paid. Hi everyone, I'm Bryce and I'm a portrait photographer in Los Angeles. Clearly I don't sound very Los Angeles. I am from New Zealand. I've lived in Los Angeles for nearly 4 years and this is where my studio is today. I would love to talk to you about printing in-house. So about 4 years ago when I decided that the reveal wall was the way to sell portraits, I thought it would be a great idea for the next 12 portrait shoots that I had booked, and I had 3 months of very booked diary. So I basically had 12 shoots back to back, and I thought it would be a really great idea if I tested this reveal wall. So I called a friend and said, what printer do you recommend? And 4 years ago she recommended the Canon Pro 1. So this is the Canon Pro 1000. So this is the baby sister of this one. And I ordered the Canon Pro 1. At the time, it was $999 from B&H with a rebate. I got a rebate, I bought paper, and unfortunately, I did not have the transforming experience that I thought I was gonna have. It was almost impossible for me to set it up because I didn't read the manual. And I also got very confused about profiles and downloading, and basically I could get a print out of it, but it looked very substandard. And it worked really good for the filming of the reveal because the whole point was I would do the shoot, my client would leave, I would retouch the images immediately, and then my assistant would print them off as I was getting them ready. And then my client would come back either later that night or the next morning, and there were their beautiful printed images done and on the wall. And I wanted to film them because I really wanted to gauge how well the sales were going around instantly printed reveal images. And I ended up having a whole lot of problems, not being able to get prints that I thought were good enough. And it looked really good on camera, but it didn't look really good in real life. And I was doing a couple of things really wrong. So what I had done wrong was I did not download the software or the plugin that goes into Photoshop, Canon Print Studio Pro, which changed everything because all of the printer profiles are on there, and now I have that. So I fought with it for a few weeks and I made it a lot harder than it was. I got very confused and I almost gave up. I almost gave up and threw this printer in my storage room and never looked at it again until I actually reached out to Canon and said, I need your help. And they said, well, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. So anybody interested in printing, and regardless of whether you're printing on a Canon printer or another printer, unless you download the right paper profiles and the right printing profiles, you're not going to get a lab quality image from your printer. You also have to ask about archival quality ink versus pigment, and which is best and what's going to last forever, etc. for your clients. So the Pro 1 was my printer for 3.5 years. This year I upgraded to the Pro 1000. So the Pro 1 was great. It printed 13 by 19 inches, and because the majority of my product is 7 by 10, I could get 2 7 by 10s on one sheet of paper with an average cost of around $2.20 per sheet. So I knew that I was being cost effective. I had the control of being able to print whenever I wanted, and if I didn't like the color or the density or anything wrong with my image retouching wise, I could change it and print it instantly. So I got very addicted to printing my own work, and I also got very addicted to the fact that I had not only control, but the speed of being able to print my own work. So I did that for about 3.5 years, outsourcing my enlargements. When they made the Pro 1000 last year, I upgraded because it prints 17 by 22, which means a 1620, which is my most popular sized wall portrait. I could print here on one sheet of paper. It also meant that I could get 4 7 by 10s on one sheet of paper instead of 2. So it was halving my costs. However, that bigger paper is more expensive. So it does work out to be very similar, the Pro 1 and the Pro 1000. Any studio can operate quite happily with this printer because it prints up to a 1620, and if you're going to get anything larger, then you can outsource your larger or your enlargements to a lab. I was lucky enough this year to be able to get this. So this is the 44-inch Pro 4000. This is for a serious studio or a studio with some serious turnover. In Australia, friends of mine have had a portrait studio for 8 years. They've always had the very large format 42-inch Epson printer, and they have been printing their own work for 3 years. So they've been monitoring their income versus output on ink and paper for 3 years, and they are averaging around a 20 by 24 inch or around a 20 by 30 inch print, which can have multiple small prints on it. They are averaging out around $2.60 per print. So in terms of cost, it works out to be almost exactly the same as outsourcing to a lab. If you find a lab that works really well for you and you really love them, they have a good turnaround, you're ordering your work quickly enough and you're getting time to get your work back, and your client's happy, and you've got your good color profiles, and you know the result you're going to get from the lab. All of these things take time, whether you're printing at home or whether you're outsourcing. It really doesn't matter. It's whatever suits you best. I wouldn't tell a startup photographer to go and get a printer. There are other things you might want to invest in first. It's definitely an advanced move to print your own work, but it's one that significantly changed the way I felt about my work, and I wouldn't change it for the world. This printer can print 44 inches wide. So the largest print I could print is 44 inches wide by whatever long, because it's a roll, which is extraordinary in terms of enlargements. The biggest portrait I sell is around 30-45, and it can go to 40 by 60, but 30-45 is a huge, big poster size portrait, and it's one that I've sold many times in my studio. In my very first studio, I printed 22 30 by 45s, and I block mounted them. And as you walked into my studio, in the corridor, up the stairwell, down the first corridor in the first office space, and down the main corridor to the restroom, I had 22 30-45s. I did not show anything smaller, because what you show is what you sell. And that first 3 years, I sold more 30-45s than the last 20 years I had been in a portrait studio, because I simply showed them, I block mounted them, they were very simply mounted, and they were a really attractive product to my clients. In terms of printing at home, if you have a love for the darkroom, or if you have had any experience printing your own work, you will definitely stand with me in the we love printing our own work department. I love printing my own work because it's cost effective, and a lot of people think it's really expensive, but it's actually the same, if not cheaper, than outsourcing to a lab. It is my control and it is my speed. I can literally finish a shoot, retouch it, and be printing that night if I need to. There is no experience to me than trying to explain to people watching my images come off the printer. The other day we were printing our very first big enlargements of this printer, and my staff and a few visitors that had popped into the studio that afternoon, including the client whose images they were standing around watching this printer print. And I just noticed something. Every single person that was watching the images come out were photographing it as they were coming out. Everybody was saying the same thing. It makes me want to cry. It makes me want to cry. And And I keep thinking, why does it make us want to cry? It is the strangest thing to me that we could be printing our work, which seems like the most obvious thing a photographer would do, is print their work. And it's really coming back to an old way of selling and to an old way of presenting our work. We see so much of our work online. To see it in print is truly, truly rewarding and emotionally life-changing. I can't exactly pinpoint why, but I can go back to a time when I remember being in a dark room, and I remember the feeling of watching an image come to life, or hanging those images and the smell of being in that dark room and watching an image be born that truly changes you as an artist and a photographer. I highly recommend both of these printers. A studio could operate incredibly well with this smaller printer, and I get that this big baby here is definitely going to be for an established portrait studio, but if you are that established portrait studio and you're wondering if this is the printer for you, it impressed me so much this month, and I'm so proud that I own it and that I can create more enlargements with it and more wall portraits with it, because it really is an extraordinary printer. In terms of printing in general, if you already have a printer, so many photographers actually over the years have invested in printers and are now revisiting the printer. Now we have the added advantage of definitely support. Just about all companies that make these printers now have pretty much 24/7 online or help desk support where you can call and ask for help. It's about downloading the right driver, making sure that you have the paper profiles, the printing profile and the printer profile that you need to get really incredible prints. Once you do a little bit of experimenting, you're away printing your own work, and I truly believe it significantly changes the way that you value your work, the way that you see your work, the way that you sell it. Somebody asked me, I get asked a lot of interesting questions. One of them was always about ink price, always about paper choice. I love the luster. So for me, when I was printing darkroom, fiber-based paper to me and Hammermühle German art rag was definitely my choice. They now make both of these papers for these printers, these modern printers. You can get a fiber-based thick paper, you can get a heavier thickness GSM, you can get a really beautiful German art rag, you can get pigment without, you can get like a rippled watercolor paper. There are so many beautiful choices. So I got a whole lot of samples when I first got this printer, and I printed art rag, fiber base, double matte, premium matte, luster, and luster being the cheapest of the Canon papers, but the not shiny one. So I printed all of these samples, I laid them out on a very long table, the boardroom, and I asked photographers, friends, and non-photography friends to tell me which ones they liked. And it was really interesting. Out of every single lineup I did, everybody chose the luster in their final two, the cheapest paper of them all, and everybody chose the beautiful, thick German art paper, the Hammermühle rag, the German art rag, because it's a art paper and it's matte and it's very beautiful. So I let people's opinions sway me, and the truth is that 99% of my work that goes out there is on luster paper. It holds the blacks really well. It gives you a beautiful image. It's not shiny. Everything up here currently is printed on the luster paper. So that is the Pro luster paper for Canon. So that's another question I get. Ink cost, paper use, paper cost. I've had no problem sourcing paper, and not just Canon paper, paper from all other distributors around the world. As I said, I love Hammermühle for the art paper. It's absolutely beautiful. The next question I get asked a lot is basically, is it archival paper? So these printers, we went through a lot of development the last 20 years making printers. And at first, there was a lot of different trials put into the paper we were printing on. We were doing luminescence, covering, oh, you name it. They've tried everything to make the images stand out, to make them more sparkly, and a lot of what they were putting on the paper was dating the paper over time. How do we know if photographic paper will live longer than 100 years? We don't. We can only judge it by the paper that exists today that is 100 years old. We know what makes paper archival. We know what gives it longevity. UV and direct sunlight are going to kill any photograph, black and white or color, regardless of how it's toned, printed or fixed. We know this. About in the later 90s, we started to get a whole lot of black and white handprints back that were silverizing on a certain style of paper, and we realized that they weren't fixed properly in the darkroom, and they were all doing this. They were turning about 10 years old, and the shadows were all going silver. They have done so many tests on these papers now to make sure that they're archival as they can be, and that is exactly what we are striving for now. These printers are no different than any other lab, provided the images are kept away from the sun and are looked after. They're as archival as they can be, in all honesty, but they are no different than any other print. The quality of these images, I know you can't see these up close or touch them, but the quality of these images are extraordinary. I will continue to print in-house. I will continue to print my enlargements in-house, and I can highly recommend both of these printers. I love printing. If there was an emotional reason to do your own printing, not only a financial one or the control, or that you can create your own images. In fact, that brings me to another question I get asked a lot. What happens when your clients say, are these quality prints or are they forever prints? I like to say my images are hand printed by me personally in-house. And I feel like that would be the closest you could get to taking an image into a dark room and giving it life, and knowing that you've given somebody a handprint that you've made right from the beginning. I choose to see nothing but value in this, and I feel like it has rewarded me tenfold. And I can't talk about it enough, because it truly, truly makes me feel something on a physical level. I get goosebumps watching it, watching the experience of printing, and I love it. I love it. Another really great question that I get asked a lot is, how do you mount your images and how do you treat your images after you've printed them? So I sell all of my wall portraits custom framed. I have a custom framer that I deliver my images to, and I custom frame. Once they go to a custom framer, the one good thing about custom framing, because you can definitely sell on a cheap framer. You can buy in your own frames. You could go Amazon framing and get frames delivered to you for $30 and slip them in yourself. But the beautiful thing about custom framing is you're going to pay a little bit more money, which is what you're going to charge for your product, because I can honestly look my clients in the eye and say, your images are archival, 100 years, museum grade product. They are mounted, heat sealed, and then they are heat sealed onto a backing board, put into the frame. They are vacuumed, air vacuumed out. They are sealed, done, archival paper with archival tape, glue, UV glass. I'm giving every opportunity for this frame to stay framed and beautiful on your wall for 100 years. That's what a custom framer does. That's the difference between a $21 frame and a $120 frame. But the truth is if you're selling a $2,000 photo shoot, your clients deserve to have custom framing that is done properly. How I mount these images, so these mats are they already come made from Fineo or Celdex, depending on which country you're in. They're already glued together with an opening at one end. I take my images, I slide them into the mat, I slide them down and down inside the mat, and they sit in them. The one thing I've found about the Celdex Fineo mats is that they're actually really beautifully made, so they're quite solid, which means that the frame, the image slides in, is quite firm. It takes a little bit of practice. Some people get very confused at how to do it at first. I simply put the mat down, slide in one end, hold it against my body and pull the image down and press down into it. I then make sure I wipe my fingerprints off and make sure that my image is nice and clean and my mat is nice and clean. So always having clean hands. I find it easier to work without cotton gloves. Some people want to work with cotton gloves, that's absolutely fine. I don't have very sweaty fingers, and I just have to make sure my hands stay really clean and that I have a nice soft cloth to wipe my images. You can put some double-sided tape and secure these images into these mounts, but with the Celtics Fineo mounts, I don't need to. They are held in there quite firmly. Because they are not being displayed out very often, and they are not being put into the light, because they're mostly a folio box, which is a keepsake box. They don't need any protective filter or layer over them like a frame does. However, I explain to my clients, if you're going to remove the images from the box and frame them, you'll want to take the image out, which is why I don't seal them in, so a framer can then custom frame them, because then you know that they're archival for many years and you know that they're going to be looked after and hang on the wall. And always educate your clients on direct sunlight and keeping their images away from that window, which is really, really important.